Ontario, Canada. Welcome. I'm Kevin Bulmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man. We are up to episode 112 of diving into and discovering the journeys of what I call heart-centered entrepreneurs. And today, I'm really excited to be joined by Yoda Olinyk. Before I bring Yoda on and introduce you to her and her to you, just to let you know, Yoda is the chef and owner at Yoda's Kitchen. It's a plant-based catering company making healthy foods and vegan donuts, which I'm seeing are getting all the love, especially on the Instagrams. For whatever reason, vegan donuts seem like they were made for Instagram photos. You'll be able to find that out for yourself and look up Yoda's Kitchen on Instagram. And I'm sure this is going to come up in the conversation as well, that Yoda recently published what she's calling a cookbook memoir, which is a neat concept, I think. It's called Salt and Sour, My Recipe for Starting Over. Now, Yoda and I got to collaborate on one of the events that I produce and host, Mo Mondays London, which is an inspirational event series. And we did that just a little bit more than a month ago. And it was a little odd because we were doing that in the COVID era. So we had to have masks and like hose each other down with hand sanitizer and things like that. This time I actually get to see Yoda's face.
Hey, Kevin.
And there it is. It's great to see you. How are you keeping?
I'm keeping so well. I'm in my home right now. I'm feeling cozy. Got my dog on the couch. I've got a tea. I really couldn't be better. It's great.
And and I say it's nice to see you. For those who are listening to the audio of this podcast, you'll just have to take my word for it. It's Yoda's got a nice smile on her face.
Thank you.
Just to go with the personality that you're going to love as you listen to this conversation. The dog, though, you mentioned the dog. You've already warned me that there might be a bark attack.
Well, I work from home sometimes now, right? Like I have my catering kitchen, of course, but I work from home on, doing interviews and all this promotional stuff for my book. And I've had a few times where during the day, like a squirrel will come to my window, so my dog will start barking her head off. So I already gave Kevin the pre-warning that could happen. It probably won't. She looks pretty cozy right now, but you never know.
Oh, you shouldn't have said that.
I know, right?
I'm all for So what I said to Yoda is, if there's a bark attack, there's a bark attack. Like as long as it's real, we would just keep rolling as long as the intergalactic Wi-Fi connections keep us tethered in some respect, just to stay in here with us, and we'll keep going. Yoda, I've got so much that I want to ask you about. There's so much that I know will be relatable to people who come and find this podcast. From an entrepreneurial perspective, from a self-discovery perspective, from a transformation perspective. So we'll unpack as much of it as we can. Let's start with the book, though. You already mentioned the book, and this, I think, is the most recent thing on the scene. How would you describe what is a cookbook memoir?
So a cookbook memoir, it's kind of a new genre. It's a very popular one. A lot of chefs are publishing their stories. So a memoir is obviously like an autobiographical story of someone's life or just, one experience. And that's kind of what I set out to do when I started writing my book, because I had a pretty unique experience of opening a restaurant in London, Ontario. And then very shortly after, I had to close that restaurant. And I decided to write the story of sort of what happened there, everything that led me to deciding to open the restaurant, and then everything that happened there, and then sort of like the aftermath, because it was really the craziest thing that's ever happened in my life. And I thought it made for a pretty great story. So I set out to write this memoir, which is very common. It's like one of the most common genres of nonfiction out there. And then I started working on it in 2017, took a big break in 2018 because it turns out writing a memoir is like pretty icky. Like it's basically like one big therapy session that just goes on for years. So I had to take a huge break from writing the book, like 6 months, which was really interesting because a lot happened in those 6 months that I decided I then wanted to include in the story. And then around the time that I started looking for a publishing agent, there was a couple stories. Obviously, I'm a chef, so there was quite a few stories in the book that had to do with food, either me cooking for someone or me eating something or like a food memory of some kind. So I started with one recipe in particular. I thought, man, I'd really like to include this recipe in this book somehow, but I didn't know how to do that. So I started looking up, are there memoirs and storybooks out there that have recipes in them? And it turns out there are. It's not that popular, but I think it will become quite popular. So basically, in my book, there's only 17 recipes in it, and it's not really like a cookbook. Like, it's not like you open it and there's photos of each recipe and a little blurb. It's really more of a book, a story, and then after certain food memories, I've included the recipe for that food memory that sort of coincides with that. Another name for this type of genre is culinary biography. It's also called that sometimes. So really, adding the recipes was sort of an afterthought. It became a cookbook memoir. But what I really love about the fact that it's a cookbook memoir is it combines both of my sort of true loves, which is cooking and writing. And it also adds a bit of like lightness to the story. There's some pretty heavy themes in my book. So when I tell, maybe a really sad story, it's followed up with this sort of jovial, playful recipe. I find it just gives the reader a bit of a break, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I'm curious about when you set out, because you started with the memoir part, it sounds like
Yes.
the memoir part, that sounds like I'm underselling it, but
No, you're right.
I think
though.
you know what I mean. Did you intend all the way along to add recipes into it?
No, I didn't add recipes until it would have been fall of 2019. So my book came out on August 20th of this year. So like I said, I started writing it in August 2017, about a few days after my restaurant closed. I started feverishly writing, and I didn't know it was a book even then. I just thought I was writing to cope, I would say. But then actually, kind of funny story, because I know my friends over at Zenza Pizza, Jocelyn
Yep.
and Wayne. So I've been writing for about 2 or 3 months, and I was going through a lot at that time. I had moved out of my home. I'd gone through a separation. I'd kind of said goodbye to one of my pets. I'd moved back home with my parents. Like, it had been a really big couple months, and I was just writing. And I think it was maybe December or November, maybe, Jocelyn and Wayne hosted an open mic night at the Pizzeria at Zenza. And I decided to go, and I brought just a page from this book. I'd been writing this story, and I read it out loud. And so many people came up to me after that and said, you need to tell this story. Like, this story is one that really needs to be told. And that's really what sort of made me think, hey, maybe I should actually turn this into a book. So after that, I started writing in a different way. I started writing with like goals. So I said, like, okay, today I'm going to write 3,000 words or 2,000 words or whatever it was. But then, like I mentioned, in 2018, I took a big break from life in general, but also from working on my book, because I needed a break. I went to Europe for like almost 2 months and backpacked and just did some healing work, and came back with all of these amazing stories. And like I said, then I added some of those to the book, and then it wasn't until the end of that year that I decided that perhaps adding recipes would be a good way to incorporate some lightness into the story.
Okay, so we've got a lot that we can explore from what you've shared already. I knew this was going to be the case. That's why I asked you to come and do this. We're probably going to need to have a whole Yoda series, which I know is going to be pleasing to your many fans. Funny to me that you mentioned about Wayne and Jocelyn from Zenza Pizzeria. I should know off the top of my head what episode that it is, where they both joined me to tell the story.
Oh, nice.
Which is really more of a love story than it is a pizza story, but I put the clickbaity title, How to Start a Pizzeria. So if you're hearing this and you want to know who Yoda's talking about, go back into the archives, either at noschedulemanpodcast.com or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you're finding this, and invest some time in that conversation with Wayne and Jocelyn, because they are just angels in human bodies. And that place, Zenza Pizzeria, is a really special place. Interesting to me, Yoda, that you kind of did an open mic sort of a thing there, because I had told either Wayne or Jocelyn or both of them that if I couldn't do Mo Mondays at the London Music Club, the venue where we host it here in the city in which we live, that it would be a place like Zenza that I would want to go, just because of the energy and the vibe. Anyway, that's just a bit of a personal anecdote that I felt compelled to share with you.
I'd actually like to share one with you, Kevin, because I actually thank Jocelyn and Wayne in the back of my book.
Neat.
And I'll just read you quickly what I said. I said, thank you to Jocelyn and Wayne for creating the best pizza in the world and a safe space for me to speak and share, because it really was the first time that I had gone out and shared any of my writing before. And ever since then, I haven't stopped. Like I haven't stopped.
That is so good. I'm going to find out exactly which episode that is. Nice. And I'm going to throw one more name in the mix for people who are looking. It's episode 101. It's called How to Start a Pizzeria. You can find it at noschedulemanpodcast.com. And I would also refer you back to, sorry, I've left you out here on the video by yourself. I would also refer people back, before we jump back into Yoda's timeline here, to episode 86, which is called Doing All the Things, with our mutual friend Jenna Goodhand, who is the one who introduced me to Wayne and Jocelyn.
It's a great episode, and she does all the things, does she not?
Yeah. There's the school, and I actually, Yoda, sometimes wish I was more like this. The school of thought of do one thing and be an expert, go an inch wide and a mile deep, and there are times where I honestly wish I was more like that. I feel like my life would be easier.
Because you have a lot of things on the go. Is that what you mean?
I just get restless unless I'm challenged in some sense. And I get this, and I know Jenna's certainly like that, sort of like that on steroids. I say that with love. But you're kind of like that too, I think.
Well, I've had a really interesting journey in the realm of being busy. So my original Mo Mondays talk that I did before you hosted, I did one, I think in 2017. And it was called, the topic of my talk was called The Busyness Trap. And I used to do some pretty heavy public speaking on the very act of like being addicted to doing stuff, because it's been a theme in my life. It's come up in different ways. So one of the things that I write about in my book is about how I found out really young fairly young, that I had the mind of an entrepreneur, but I'm also very well suited to, well, when I was younger, I was really well suited to the life of a chef and the life of somebody in the hospitality industry. So like it's an industry that not everyone is cut out for, because it's very high stress. It's very fast paced. People talk about being a chef, I think today, in like a very glamorous way. Like you're going to be on the Food Network and you're going to have like, this cooking show and all that. But really, no matter who you are, when you're starting out, you are washing dishes, you are getting cuts and on your feet 14, 16 hours a day. Like for me, like there's no such thing as an 8-hour shift in a restaurant. It's just not a thing. It's 12 hours usually, sometimes more. It's usually in a hot, cramped space. So tensions run high, stress runs high. One of the things that I talk about a lot in my book is like this sort of mental health / addictions that just run rampant in the culinary industry, specifically with servers, cooks, bartenders, because it's partly because the job is so high stress that you have to have something, like you have to cope with that lifestyle. And the other part of it is like, we live to serve. Like I live to bring people joy. That is my purpose in this world, and I do it through food. And you obviously do it by helping other people share their stories. And Jenna has her own way of doing it, and Wayne and Jocelyn have their own way of doing it. But like for somebody like myself, like my life's purpose is to bring people joy through food, So of course I wanted to work in restaurants when I was coming up, and I wanted to own my own restaurant, my own business. And that's exactly what I did. But the negative aspects of the industry started taking a toll on me when I was quite young. To be honest, Kevin, I can't even remember the question you asked me. I'm going off on like a tangent now. So remind me if I don't touch base on it. But
it might not even have been a question. We were two people who like tangents, and they'll eventually loop back around on each other.
It's something I'm really passionate about talking about because, like I said, it's kind of glamorized my business, and it is a wonderful career path, but it definitely by the time I had opened a restaurant, I was very burnt out, and I was only 28, and I was at the top of my game. You know, I'd had my catering business for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at that point, and I had developed a really strong following. I had tons of cash coming in, tons of income. I bought a second car, you know, got a nice house, got a second dog, like was going on these vacations every year. Like really, I was doing the best you could for somebody who was like 28 years old and in the hospitality industry, right? And owning a restaurant, like just really, it's like, oh, I remember what it started with, the busyness trap. So this is me giving into my addiction of being busy all the time. And I don't want to say that every person out there who is like a go-getter and who has goals and who likes to, like someone like yourself who is like restless with staying still, that doesn't mean that everybody who's in that boat has an actual addiction to being busy. That's what I label mine as, because it felt imperative to me that I did not stay still, to the point where the first thing that happened was I started developing injuries. So I tore something in my shoulder a couple months, like the first month we opened the restaurant. So I had to I would wear a sling. Anytime I wasn't at the restaurant, my arm would be in a sling. But when anyone saw me, I would be fine because I was always moving. And I was always appearing to be busy and happy and healthy. But really on the inside, I was in a lot of physical pain. That injury kept getting worse and worse and worse. And then it developed into the mental stuff, where you start really your mood and your mental state just start declining. And when you're busy all the time, you don't notice it until for me, it was until it was too late, right? And that is what I'm trying to avoid in my life now. I'm trying to be busy, stay goal-oriented and ambitious, and keep like publishing a book and doing podcasts, but I'm also trying to make sure I have the time to recognize when it's getting too much, when I'm no longer happy, when I'm developing these body aches and pains. That's like the first sign. Okay, Yoda, you need to chill. You need to like maybe not do 7 things tomorrow. Maybe just do like 3. But I get it. I get the whole like the feeling restless thing. It's like a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's obviously why you have like a successful podcast and why you're like hosting Mo Mondays and why people want to talk to you. Same for me. It's launched my career to where it is, but it's got its downsides to it as well, right? It can be taxing.
Yeah, it's a constant monitoring, and there's a high degree of self-awareness, I think, that comes from going through the fire of the old cliche of not knowing where the line is until you hurdle across it. I think that life, to some extent, certainly my life, has been a constant series of those kinds of occasions. I'm interested to hear you describe the environment, as stressful as it is. I hadn't really thought of it like that, but as you described, I'm recalling how I felt about the time in my life when I did serve tables, and I thought decent at it, but I remember feeling that it was a very, very stressful job. But now part of that has to do with my natural lean toward perfectionism and anxiousness
Mhm.
and whatnot. But knowing that environment was going to be like that, or maybe I'm assuming that you did know going into it. What I'm getting at was to see if I can set up a question to inquire of what drew you to that
Mm.
industry and that line of work to begin with.
It's pure and simple. It was my love of food,
And
you
where did
know?
that come from?
So I it's I've had an interesting journey into food. I think people like to hear the story of like the chef who like grew up, you know, wanting to learn how to cook and had like an Italian grandmother that taught them all their traditional recipes and all that. Like for some reason that's the image in my head that like people want. That's not really my story. I grew up in Thorndale, Ontario, and my parents were very eclectic. They are very eclectic people, especially my dad. And we grew up with a big garden. We were kind of like the only. We didn't have a farm. We were like the only house on the street that didn't have a farm, but it was like pretty far out into the country. My dad still lives in that house actually. So we grew up with a big garden, and we, when I was a kid, it was very normal for us to, say, "Oh, I'm hungry," and like the other kids in my class would get like, Dunkaroos or something, and my parents would say, "Oh, go to the garden," and we'd like pick a carrot and eat it or something like that. It was very so I grew up with like vegetables my whole life and being a kind of central part of my life, but I definitely wasn't interested in becoming a chef. I don't know what I thought I'd be, but being a chef hadn't really crossed my mind. Um, and then I went through, all my schooling and everything, and I took a year off between high school and college to kind of figure it out. Still, chefing wasn't really on my radar at all. And in that year, after I turned 18, my parents separated, and my mom moved out, and I actually stayed at the house with my dad. So it was my dad and me and my older sister at the time, and it was a tough a tough season for us all because it was a big change in the family, and my dad wasn't he wasn't doing too well. He was just kind of a everyone was kind of a mess, I think, for a couple months. So during those couple months, we had to feed ourselves for the first time because my mom was a great cook and she made all of our meals, including, if she went away on a business trip, she would like batch cook stuff for us. Like we really didn't know how to make anything. So we ate for a couple months, we ate a lot of like frozen pizzas and craft dinner. That's what I remember, because we lived in the country, so you can't really get like takeout. Like it's not like we could order, from Uber Eats like you can now and have all this variety and have healthy food. We were eating like craft dinner. I'm talking like every meal for months. And like my poor father, like he's trying to navigate parenting two young girls and also trying to feed us. And we were just, and I mean, we were teenagers at the time, so like craft dinner for every meal was like not that bad. But eventually I got to the point where I was like, we need to have a proper meal. So we used to have these big family feasts every Sunday. And my mom would make something different, but it was always like, my mom's German, so it was always very hearty, like braised food. And I didn't know how much I appreciated it until it was gone, kind of thing. So this one Sunday, I decided to make one of my mom's like recipes. Although I didn't have the recipe, but I'd watched her make it like a handful of times. So yeah, I went to the freezer. I found a roast, a mystery meat package, and I threw it in a pot of boiling water, and I braised it for a few hours, which really I just like boiled the heck out of this like frozen. It was basically like if you were gonna have a recipe that was like how not to make a pot roast, that's what I did. But here's the thing: is I cooked that, and the house smelled like food, and then we ate it. My dad and I ate it together at the table. And we hadn't done that since my mom had left. And basically I did that, and then I did it again, and I did it again. And then I opened a cookbook that was like collecting dust in the kitchen. I did it again, I did it again. I was by no means good at cooking at this point, but I had found something that I think I was seeking
Hmm.
for most of my life, which was like, what is my passion? Like, what am I here for? And it was really honestly after that first meal that I cooked that I was like, oh, this is what I'm here for. This is really fun and challenging. And it only a few months after that I told my dad I was going to go to chef school, and like the rest is kind of history.
What, if anything, up to that point were the kinds of things that you were thinking that you might pursue in terms of a professional
It's
path?
it's funny that you asked me that because somebody kind of asked me a similar question the other day, and I honestly think that I don't know. I think um my dad was an entrepreneur. I got my entrepreneur spirit from my dad for sure. He's been an entrepreneur for my whole life. He never like he quit his job to start his business when I was like 5. So when I was a kid, it was like this amazing thing because like my dad was so much cooler than all the other dads. Like he would be like all my friends, their dads would come home at like 6 o'clock and like because they had corporate day jobs, and they'd kind of like throw their suitcase down and then they like go like pour themselves a beer and like park in front of the TV. And they just seemed like, I don't know, kind of like not unhappy, but like it was very routine.
Hmm.
And they just lived for the weekend. My dad, every day was the weekend for my dad. He got up whenever he wanted. He, would be playing guitar when we got home from school, like just chilling out. Of course, he worked hard, but like he's a night owl, so he likes to work at night.
Hmm.
He does computer software design. He's still like that, by the way. But when I was a kid, it was kind of like, man, being an entrepreneur is the best. I didn't see all the stuff that was going on behind the like sidelines that was like, oh, this is actually a lot of work and really stressful and like expensive and all the things. But that's really what turned me on to like maybe owning my own business someday. I think I knew I wanted to do that at some point. But other than that, I didn't really know. I had some, a couple hobbies here and there when I was a kid, but nothing that really stood out as a career path, I don't think. How about you? What did you want to be when you were a kid?
A sports broadcaster.
Oh yeah. Well, you're
Yeah.
kind of doing that halfway.
Yeah, I I went to high school at Beale here in London, Ontario,
Oh, nice.
and
Okay.
because they had a radio and TV arts program, and I went through that program and knew, okay, this is what I want to do, but I still had more credits to get. It was a 2-year program, and I had to stick around, and that's where my regrets start in life because I got
Mm,
very frustrated and angry because I felt like I knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted to by God go and start doing it.
yeah.
And I ended up taking a 2-year college program rather than going to university. And
Mm,
that's nothing against the college. I'm proud of that. I was broadcaster of the year, blah, 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 blah. Um, but I've always regretted that I had a lot of restlessness brewing in me
mm,
at that time. And I always
interesting.
wondered what would have happened if I'd have slowed down a little bit, like I encourage people to do now, which you alluded to about
Yeah.
I want to stay at it, but I want to stay in the race. Like one of
Yeah.
probably my signature keynote presentation is called Rise Like a Phoenix, Race Like a Turtle. And I talk about sucking it up and how detrimental that was to me. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about that earlier in what you were sharing. And the race like a turtle part,
Yeah.
the hair between the tortoise and the hare he pulls out of the race every now. And to me, all the world's a hare. The
Mm,
tortoise might not be going very fast, but it never stops.
yeah.
Right. It's always in the game. And I think that's the balance. So
Yeah.
and I don't think, Yoda, that you would have ever been able to have a conversation with me about being an entrepreneur. These are all things I learned
Yeah.
through necessity at some of the paths that my life took. And so I'm interested, especially into the context of what you shared earlier about kind of a different thought model between
Mhm.
entrepreneurship
Yeah.
and hospitality industry. We're going to skip forward in the story a little bit, but let's jump to where you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do this at some level.
Hmm.
Now, if there's part of the story that needs to be filled in, like for instance, going and working somewhere else or
Mm.
apprenticing somewhere, by all means, take us through that journey. But I'd love to get to where you had to start to confront the ability and the willingness to figure out some of this entrepreneurial stuff in order to be a chef. How
Yeah.
did that all manifest?
Well, so yeah, I did. So I kind of leaving off where we went there. So I went to college in Niagara Falls, and just my passion for cooking at that point was just off the radar. I was reading every book there was. I was like worshiping, you know, Anthony Bourdain and all the like hot chefs out at the time, and I was getting like absolute straight A's in class in school because I was just like an obsessed, like I was just really serious about becoming like this incredible chef. I started feeling the challenges of what was gonna be in my way, basically, because my industry is a very male dominated industry. So most of the celebrity chefs you can think of are probably men. And you know, if you walk into every kitchen I've ever worked in, I've always been one of the only females. And when I was in school, we started with a good mix of men and women. But then around like the second semester, second year, we were down to just a few. And part of that is because of the nature of the job. It's kind of brutal, you know. And not to say that women can't handle that, but I think a lot of times women choose to say like, this isn't something I want to be a part of, you know. And I get that. I definitely went through that a little bit, but again, my passion for it was so strong. I thought, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find a way to like tough it out, basically. Fake it till I make it, you know, which I friggin' hate that phrase now. And I will, if I hear someone saying that, I will be the first one to step in and be like, excuse me, let's chat, let's break that down. Yeah, not a fan of the fake it till you make it now. But when I was young, you're like, that's the advice I was getting, right? So I came home from Niagara College and got my apprenticeship. I did my apprenticeship over at Sunningdale Golf Course, and it was a great job. I learned a ton there. Something kind of started happening around like year 2 or 3 of my apprenticeship. I was like in my early 20s. I wanted to cook and eat everything. I just had this like burning desire in my body to experience everything. So because of that, the job that I had, this great job, started becoming kind of like monotonous, a little mundane. So I decided to take off and travel, because that's what all the great chefs told me to do. All the great chefs that I admired said, go see the world, taste other foods, experience other cultures. So I did that for a while. I went to Australia and backpacked. That's when my love of traveling sort of started. Did some other traveling, went across Canada, got a job out in BC. I came home from that. Again, I was still in my early 20s. And then just worked at a bunch of different restaurants in London. Again, I was always kind of going through the same few challenges, which was, one of them was like being a woman in my industry was tough, because you got to be tough, like man or woman. You have to be tough to make it as a chef, but as a woman, you have to be like double tough. Because
can I jump in on you here?
For sure, of course, yeah.
And I'm going to table something that probably sounds very ignorant.
Go for it. I'm ready.
Well, I also like to cook.
Yeah.
I have, and I'm trying to, I'll just come right out and say it. I'm always mystified at those who still perpetuate certain roles between a male and a female, you know, and I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that at least in the generations that came before ours, it was more typical for the female to be the one who was doing the cooking. Because I still get sideways glances sometimes when I talk. Like, I like being in the kitchen.
But it's as like a traditional like homemaker role. It would be tradition for like the mother to be at home by the stove.
Well, this is what I'm getting. It's interesting, the juxtaposition there between a chef as a profession on a larger stage or something, that it would be so male dominated when that's not how you might associate things with in the home. Granted, I'm not trying to say that what somebody like you does as a chef is reflective of what some meatball like me
well, you know what?
would do at home, but you see why I think it's a little curious.
I do, and that's definitely like I would say like a misconception, maybe a little bit, because when I'm speaking of being a chef, like I'm speaking of it as a vocation. Like it's a trade. Like I went through the same amount of schooling as like a mechanic or a carpenter or an architect. Like it's, or not as an architect, but as those other ones. And it's a trade. So it's something you do mostly with your hands. And trades are usually, not so much anymore, but they have been historically male dominated. And I don't really know what it is about cooking. I think what it is like the environment, as if you're working at like a mid-range sort of restaurant as like a line cook, it's an environment that it takes a very specific personality to thrive in. And I'm not saying men have that more than women, but I just think that uh, the issues that come into play, it's an unhealthy lifestyle, really. It is. Like I was talking about before, the being on your feet for all those hours, the being under stress for all those hours. And it was just like something that I noticed, that there was just a lot less. It was just my experience. And it's definitely changed. Like even since I've been cooking professionally for like 15 years, it's changed even in that time. And I've been part of that change in the city, for example, because like when I owned a restaurant, I was, the head chef, and I hired men and women, both. Like it was important to me that it was like not a factor. Gender wasn't a factor. But like, here's an example I'll give you, Kevin. So a sales rep comes into my restaurant that I own. Okay. And they say, and I'm like 28 years old, and I look the same way I do now, like, young and just like doing my thing. Sales rep comes in and they say to my sous chef, who's a man, just just an average Joe. Hey, are you the head chef? I wanted to give you these samples. And he says, no, I'm not the head chef. Then he turns to the other male cook in the kitchen and says, oh, you must be the chef. Can I show you these samples? This cook says, oh, no, I'm not the boss. He doesn't acknowledge me. He walks out of the kitchen and says to the dining room manager, who isn't even in a chef's coat, hey, are you in charge? Can I give you some samples? It's like this man couldn't believe that the only girl that actually owned the place was the one in charge. So like that's just like, and I laugh at it now. I'm not offended by it now. I think back then I did take offense to it, but what I see now is that it's an opportunity for me to like change people's minds, right? Like and that's the reason I talk about it now, because it was a barrier for me when I was coming up, but it's becoming less so, and that's because it's being brought to people's attention. Like, so yeah, that's kind of why I brought it up.
It's interesting, and I'm glad you brought it up, because
Yeah.
I could think of a lot of different instances where something similar to that happens, but that's probably a whole separate conversation. I hijacked you on the way to delivering a conclusion on a question that I asked prior to, which was how you got to. Yeah, let's see if we can jump back on that timeline that we were on about. You had been apprenticing at Sunningdale. You were traveling around. You were trying all the foods. But you hadn't yet in the story got to where you actually started something of your own.
So in 2010, so basically I was working at a couple different London restaurants, and I was working my butt off. I was working a part-time job at a restaurant, which was more like full-time, and I was working also at Fanshawe College as a lab tech at the time. So I remember I would get up at 6 and put on my Fanshawe coat. I'd be there at 7 a.m. I'd work until about 1, go home, grab some lunch, change my coat. I'd go to the restaurant for 2, and I'd work there until 11 p.m. So I was just like rotating out of these 2 coats all the time. And I also, during that time, got the spark of catering in my head, because one of my friends' moms had asked me if I would cook a dinner in their house for her and her friends, and I said of course. And it didn't I mean, looking back, it didn't go that great. Like it went fine. It wasn't my best. It wasn't my best work, but it went fine. And I just remember what she handed me a little pile of $20 bills when I was done, and I was like, "Oh my god! Like this is the same amount of money that I made in a whole week at 2 jobs, and I get to put this all in my pocket. Like there's no, you know what I mean? Like this could be really great." So I start kind of researching how to open a catering company, and by researching I mean I had kind of asked a couple friends that I knew, and most of them were like, "Oh, it's really expensive and you have to like get insurance and find a kitchen." And because I'd witnessed my dad as an entrepreneur, I think I was a little bit fearless when I went into it. I probably should have had a bit more reservations and like been a bit more cautious, because what I actually decided to do was open a catering kitchen.
I love that. Not to hijack you again, but well, I'm the kind of
I
person
love it
who
too.
is actively doing the work to try to get out of his own way,
Yeah.
overthinking everything.
Well, you
And
have to
so,
remember too, Kevin. I was like 23 when this happened, so like
yeah,
I didn't have a lot to lose. I had like $600 in my bank account, and my rent for the kitchen was $375. And they said, okay, you don't need to give us last month's rent, just 1 month.
but
So
isn't
I
it
had to.
amazing what the universe will do for you when
Well,
you don't
yeah.
worry about the how and you just start going forward toward it?
And the thing is I what I realized after that first catering that I did, I said to myself, like, because I'm like, I've been working really hard for 3 years. I've been literally like working 60, 70 hours every week, nose to the ground, doing the grind. And I kind of started thinking, if I'm gonna work this hard, wouldn't it be great if it was for myself? Like, because to become a head chef somewhere and kind of be able to like relax a little bit, it was going to be decades away. Like it was so far out of my grasp. So I decided to launch this catering business. So I opened my first kitchen in St. Thomas with $375, and then I bought a stove off Kijiji and a fridge off Kijiji. And then I had 1 month to make $375 for rent. So I thought, like, I better get to work. And that's what I did. But I keep in mind I still had 2 jobs at the time. So I
Oh,
was
you
really
had okay.
I was stretched really thin. My contract at Fanshawe wasn't up until the end of June, and this was in March. And I had a restaurant job that I loved.
When did
So
you? I just keep hijacking you, but
I don't.
like
When did I
you're up.
sleep?
Well,
I don't know.
you're up at 6. Your lunch at 1. You're back at the restaurant at 2 until
So
11. When did you even find the time to look on
okay?
Kijiji?
So what started happening was I started taking Thursday and Friday nights off from the restaurant to do caterings. And this really wasn't okay with my boss at the time, but I was just going to try to make it work until I could afford to quit one of my jobs. And I honestly thought, I have on paper, I still have the original business plan. I said in 5 years, I want to quit one of my jobs and be catering full time. And then June came, and I ended up not signing another contract at Fanshawe. And then in July, I quit the restaurant. So it happened in like 4 months, which is
There again,
uh,
once you light the spark, it doesn't
totally.
take much to turn it into a fire.
And my business, it wasn't like I was like thriving. I wasn't a booming business, but I was keeping costs really low, and I was single job that came, like every single job. If somebody wanted like, oh, can you make 400 sandwiches for this church function tomorrow, but we only have like 50 cents a person, I'd be like, yes, 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 I'll take it, I'll take it. Like I was just doing everything because I really wanted it. Like I really wanted to be successful and work for myself.
Mm.
So I did that for a while. 4 months in, I was able to quit both of my jobs and cater full time. And then I was just on my own, trying everything that worked as a small business owner. So I was doing come in on Wednesday between 2 and 4 and buy one get one free, and like I'll be at like every show, every event. I had a table and board. I was carrying some of my business cards around with me, handing them out to people at the grocery store. Like I was doing everything with zero education on how to like be a business owner. But I found what worked, and for me, what I knew it was it was really early in my career that I realized if I do a good job and I'm a kind person, I will have repeat customers. Like people will come again and people will hire me again. But I knew what I had to do to make that happen, which was like show up on time, be professional, clean up after myself, have an outward like bubbly personality for them to like want to bring back. I knew kind of what I had to do to get these repeat customers. And I just started developing this really small, loyal following of people that would hire me. And I did that for about a year or more. And then I actually moved into an even bigger catering facility. And that's when things started going really, really well. Because I hired a bunch of staff. I got a bunch of fancy new equipment. I bought an SUV. Like all these things kind of started falling into place a couple years into the hard work.
So how did it end up falling apart?
Well, I have so when I was young, when I was a young chef, when I was coming up and I was working as a line cook in all these places, I knew that I said if I'm going to work this hard, it's going to be for myself. I think I always thought that meant I was going to own a restaurant, because that's what you did if you were to survey, year one of Fanshawe College, all the culinary kids, and said, hey, what is your end goal? Like, what are you here for? What do you want to do? I'd say that a good 95% of those kids are going to say, I want to own my own restaurant. It's like if you go to medical school, you want to be a surgeon. Like it's just, there's lots of other avenues you could take, but owning a restaurant is like the big dream for a culinary student.
And that's interesting, because that's a tough road no matter who you are, isn't it?
But you don't know when you're a budding culinary student. You just think it's going to be awesome. And then you get your feet wet in the business. And that's what happened for me. Is I share a couple stories in my book of what changed my mind. So in my 20s, when I was working in all these restaurants, I really was witness to what happens when you open your own place. So I saw one of my favorite restaurants I ever worked in. I won't say the name here, but one of my favorite restaurants I worked in, the owner, he had a mental health crisis while we were working one night because of the stress he was under. And it was all about money. It was about, we don't have enough people filling the seats. My bills are too high. Another chef that I worked for was very vocal about how he was struggling because he was missing everything his kids were doing because he was at the restaurant 14 hours a day. So he was missing watching his kids grow up. And it's a very demanding, any small business is going to be demanding of your time and your energy, but owning a restaurant is like a double-edged sword because the industry also requires so much of you.
It seems to me from where I sit to be all-consuming.
Yeah, and I didn't know that. Again, I didn't know it until I knew it. And then once I knew it, I didn't really want to be a part of it anymore. So I had one particular experience that sort of like stuck with me. And it was the owner that I worked for of this restaurant, who I idolized this guy. I thought, when I own a restaurant, I want to run it like him because he was such a great guy. And I remember he would always give us every Christmas, he gave us like each like a $200 gift certificate for Christmas. And like, he was very generous, this man. And, one night he had this big meeting with his investors and he was just crunching numbers all day and he got really stressed. And that night he had a meltdown in the kitchen and it resulted in him having a kind of an angry outburst, and he flung a a frying pan at one of the cooks. And it was scary. It was frightening. And everyone just kind of moved on with what they were doing because it wasn't that unusual, because people have breakdowns in kitchens all the time. Like, think of Gordon Ramsay. He's like one big breakdown happening on TV all the time. So people have breakdown, like people, it is a mental health, like Russian roulette in a kitchen, right? So it wasn't surprising that he had this meltdown, but afterwards he came to us and he had settled down, and he gave us all, he was passing around free beers to everyone, I remember, to try to like make nice. And I remember him saying, and he just had this grave look on his face, and he just said, like, just never open your own place. And he was venting. He was venting to us because he had had a rough day. But what he said really stuck with me. And that sort of started shifting things for me to say, maybe owning a restaurant isn't actually what's going to bring me joy in this life, right? So I started shifting things and really focusing on my catering company, because my catering company was a way that I could still serve my life's purpose, which is to bring people joy through food, and I could make decent money, and I could be home at 5 o'clock if I wanted to be. I was starting to think about maybe I wanted to have kids someday, and I was thinking like, oh, this is going to be way better for work-life balance and managing a family and everything. So I decided to sort of say goodbye to my dream of having a restaurant someday. Now, there's another story that's happening in the background of this, which is really the subject of my book.
And before you go into that, at what time, I'm just trying to keep track of the timeline of everything.
Yeah.
Around when was this at the point that you're describing?
That was probably in about 2013 or 14 and 15. Like, I'd had my business for maybe 4 or 5 years. I was in the bigger kitchen. I was making lots of money, and things were going pretty well. But at the time, I was also, when I came home from BC and I kind of settled into London, part of the reason for that was because I'd found my life partner. And we had moved in together, and he was a bartender, so we had all this stuff in common. We both really understood the demands of the industry. And when we met, I was still this young buck and was kind of saying like how much I wanted to open a restaurant someday, and he wanted to open a restaurant too. So we had this big romantic dream of, I'll make the menu, I'll do the food, you do the front of the house, you'll be the bartender and the front of house guy. And it was like a modern day restaurant fairy tale. It was perfect. But then a couple years into dating and a couple years into my business, my dream shifted because of all of these experiences I had had. But his dream didn't. He still wanted the restaurant. So in January of 2016, we got an opportunity. An opportunity came knocking at the door for us to open a restaurant. And I can't make the statement that I never wanted a restaurant, because there was a time in my life that I did. But I can say that when that opportunity came knocking and when I signed the lease for that restaurant, everything in my being was telling me that I did not want this. Mm. So there's a side story here about the things we do for love and how we can talk ourselves into, making big leaps, even when we know they're in the wrong direction, right? So for me, it was partly because of this relationship. My partner, I was trying to help him fulfill a dream. And it was also partly still that ego piece that was coming in, of people saying to me things like, oh, you don't want to be a caterer forever, do you? Like, where's the 5-star restaurant? Where'd that go? So I really let a bunch of other people talk me into opening this restaurant. And it was doomed from day one, because I didn't want to do it. It's not something that I, in my heart of hearts, really wanted to do. And anyone who's opened a business of any kind will tell you, if your heart is not in it, it's doomed. Like, it takes so much work to open a business. If you don't love it, like, what are you doing it for?
Yeah, there's a real interesting irony. I've heard a version of this part of the story through the talk that you shared at our
Yeah.
Monday's London event. I didn't have the benefit of the added context that you've given us through the rest of this conversation, which in my mind is bringing me back to where I I hijacked you earlier about the not knowing what I didn't know slow me down. You
Yeah.
had proven to yourself when we actually stopped
Yeah.
and talked and noted about these times in your life where you were just trusting your instincts and riding that wave to such an extent that it was just carrying you forward. And as the challenges came up, which they will, no matter which path you're going down, you meet them, you solve them
Mhm.
one at a
Yep.
time, versus getting to this point that you described in early 2016, I think you said, and knowing don't
Yeah.
sign that lease.
It was it was
Um,
a it was a full body knowing. I know in my Mo Monday speech, I shared the story of when my hand started shaking.
yeah.
Because literally, when they came with the lease, my hand was shaking so badly, which was my body saying, "Do not fucking do this."
Hmm.
My hand was shaking so badly that my signature was illegible, and the notary had to go and get another copy of the lease because that's how badly I was shaking. Like, I had a full 10 minutes from him leaving and coming back to change my mind. But you have to remember, like, I had at that point, my parents were telling me, "We're so proud of you for
Mhm.
opening a restaurant." I had all of my chef colleagues saying similar things like, "Wow, like, you're only 28 and you're opening a restaurant. That's insane. You must be doing something, right?"
Hmm.
And I had my partner at the time saying, "Thank you so much for giving me my dream. Like, this is going to be so good for our future." It was a lot of different, and then we got the money stuff involved. So then we did a Kickstarter campaign and we raised like $15,000 in the city of London, which is huge, to open this restaurant. So then I was like, okay, well, I can't back out now because I just took these people's money. And then we had friends and family give us some money, and we had um, Facebook posts talking about how excited we were. And it was just like this snowball that I couldn't stop. I chose not to. And this has been one of the greatest lessons and mistakes of my life, because that single decision resulted in the most devastating, painful events. And 16 months we were open. Nothing changed. I didn't magically start loving it partway through. I found joy in it because I had to survive it. But you have to remember, I had a really bad shoulder injury, that one I told you about, that never got better, and I had doctors upon doctors telling me it was nothing, because it was nothing. Like, it was an injury, but it was like, it's your body's telling you to slow it down, but I
Mhm.
couldn't because I had this restaurant to run.
Yeah, like you said, the
So
body knows.
yeah, so I had this really bad shoulder injury. I also found out my sister was quite sick. We found out my sister was really sick. I won't get too far into that, but that was a traumatizing event. The relationship that I was in, my life partner and now business partner, started breaking down, and we were fighting a lot, and there was a lot of tension at home. And basically, I just stopped doing everything that brought me any kind of joy, because I didn't have time to go to yoga class. I didn't have time to cook at home. I didn't have time to walk my dogs. Everything that I was doing to counteract the negative aspects of the industry that I spoke about before, because I had found all these things to counteract the hard parts. But all those things went away when we opened the restaurant, simply because I didn't have time or energy. So my life became get up, I would call, my sister would come over every morning to put my hair in a braid because I couldn't lift my arm up this high because of my shoulder injury. She would come braid my hair. I'd have a shower. She'd braid my hair. I'd have a coffee and an apple. That was my breakfast every day. I'd go to the restaurant at about 8, 9 a.m., start the day, do prep for 4 hours, do lunch service, maybe take a quick 10-minute break in the afternoon, start dinner service at 5, work till about 10 p.m. I'm doing this with like mind numbing pain. And that's when the vices come in. That's when the heavy drinking starts, self-medicating starts. You're just trying to cope in whatever way that you can. And then that leads to a bunch of mental health stuff that is really life altering. Like, I'd been through a couple things in my life before this, but this was like every day, every single day was the same, and it was the same kind of like misery. But keep in mind, at this point, we are full every night. We have a lineup out the door every night. London Free Press has just named us the city's best restaurant. A vegan restaurant had never won that award before. We have our reservation book full for the next like 6 months. The phone is ringing off the hook. The London Free Press is coming to take our photo and do an interview. We're on FM 96. Like, all of our friends and family are like, I'm getting texts all day saying, "Oh, I saw you on the news. Congratulations." It's literally like the world as like as it's happening, and then the world as it's actually happening. Like, they're side by side. You can see them both at the same time. It was such a weird experience.
I think it's a really strong analogy for a lot of people's lives in general.
It
You
is.
get taken over by the machinery, and there's the outward appearance, and
Yeah.
then there's that numbing reality that, because I've got my own version of the story that you just told, and the vices and the things that I got brought, in front of the mirror to face. But I really feel, Yoda, like what you described, that there is a level of that, and I'm generalizing irresponsibly, but that is functional. That it's like a trap. That on
Yeah.
that outward appearance makes it look like, well, this is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Everything looks fine, right? So hold it all together. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, there's just this
Yeah.
sort of twisted balance between
Yeah.
running on this treadmill and holding ourselves together with these things to try to bring us some sort of pleasure or cope.
And perhaps if you have one thing in there that's making it all okay, you can survive in that setting for a little bit longer, perhaps. But really, my life was kind of like crumbling around me. And all those like one small things that I would have had to like bring me out of that darkness, they'd all gone at this point. They were all, because like my relationship was not good. My family, like my sister was sick. My health wasn't good. My mental health already wasn't good. I think maybe if you're in that position of like, okay, everyone thinks things are going really well, but really I'm struggling. You might have a thing, like you might say, but you know what, my family's happy and healthy and my kids are doing well, and or like but I still get to yoga every day, and I'm taking care of myself. All of that had gone out the window for me all at the same time, which is why it was a really nasty combination.
Yeah, you were a pile of bone dry sticks sitting
I
right
was a
beside a
pile of
book of
bone dry
matches,
sticks.
and needed a
Yeah.
good rain.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, this all came apart because we kind of started there with the catharsis is not really actually the word that you used was icky to write about, with
Yeah,
revisiting some of this
I
in
stand by that.
yeah, in the cookbook memoir,
Yeah.
Salt and Sour. I've
Hmm.
had you for an hour, and there's no time limit here, but I just want to be mindful of your time as well, and not wear you out when you've got another day coming tomorrow. Um, at the risk of being insensitive to jump over a whole bunch of parts, I'm curious about where along the line you felt some sense of light again in your journey through all that.
um That's a great question. Thanks for asking that. I will sort of skip over the whole story of like, obviously I was going through that. Things were going good on the outside, but bad for Yoda. And then there were a couple events that happened, which is really my book. Like, if people want that story, they should buy the book. But but really, like, that story it's a long one, and it involves some pretty heavy stories within the story there. So basically, I was in a pretty serious depression. I didn't even recognize it as that, but I had started thinking some pretty dark thoughts. I had started imagining how the restaurant would go on if I wasn't here anymore. And to me, when I say wasn't here, it's like I wasn't on planet Earth. Like, I wasn't here. And that was a thought that I wrote about. I wrote about it in my journal, and I wrote about it a lot. And that really freaked me out, because I knew it wasn't good. It wasn't good because I couldn't get out of that thought process. So I actually decided to go see a therapist. And thank God that I literally Googled suicidal thoughts, need help. And the first link I clicked, the next day I had an appointment, and she's still my therapist to this day. But I know that is not a lot of people's experience with therapy. I just consider myself incredibly lucky that that's what happened, because she did wholeheartedly save my life. And even when I went in there, though, I was just talking about the day-to-day stuff of the restaurant. She said, well, what's bringing you all this stress? And I said, oh, well, the bread guy was late today. And I was just going on and on about these mundane, unimportant restaurant things. And she said, but like, what's going on with you? Like, what, and she couldn't break through the barrier that I had up. But every week I would just go in and just vent to her for an hour. I would just blah, 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 talk for an hour. I was beating around the bush of what the real problem was. And the real problem was that the relationship that I was in, we were having some pretty serious problems, and I really wanted out of the relationship and the restaurant. But it didn't feel possible because all of my money was wrapped up in it, and all of my ego and all of my friends. And I felt so stuck. And really, through a couple of events, therapy and like some weird universe stuff, you know how I feel about the universe. I was able to get out. So I was able to leave the relationship and the restaurant. When I say I was able to, what I mean was I left it all behind. So there was a line in the sand that said, okay, door A is you continue doing this for a little bit longer, and you make people proud, you stick with it, your ego goes untarnished, and you probably kill yourself. Or door B, you lose all your money, you close your restaurant, you leave your relationship, you probably lose your house, you maybe lose your dog, you lose your second family that you've built with this person, a bunch of your friends, the respect of your colleagues. You maybe never work in the city again, but you get to live. And maybe there's something better there under door B. Like, maybe there's something better. And I was so fed up that I chose door B. So one day I just woke up, and the day before I had a restaurant, a relationship, and a life. And then the very next day I woke up, with I don't want to say nothing, but it looked like nothing.
There are a couple of things I'd like to share with you.
Please do.
Because I've been in front of that door as well. the means to getting there is different. But
It's a scary place to be.
well, there are these trappings that you meant about money and ego,
Mm.
whatever categories we want to put to them. We're not taking
Mhm.
any of this with us anyway. We came here with nothing. We're leaving with nothing. But that's really easy to say when you're sitting in your comfy, cozy home and
Yeah.
having a nice conversation with a good friend.
Yeah.
When you're in the middle of a shitstorm, that's tougher to have that conversation with yourself. When my two things. First, where you talked about how you Googled suicidal thoughts, need help, and then that led you to a therapist who sounded like help you save your own life and find life, not just save it. But we're going to get back to that still, about where that light started to come. When my marriage was falling apart, I remember I pleaded for us to go and get some sort of counseling and therapy, and she didn't want to do that. And I understand now that she had already faced the door, and I didn't understand that at that time, but I started to go. And that was one of the best things that I ever did. Just to be heard, to get to know somebody who got to know me enough that they knew the circumstances, but wasn't so close that they didn't get sucked into all the day-to-day bullshit from a talker like me. And I just wanted to share for anybody that's coming across this, so that you're not bearing the whole weight emotionally of a situation like that, to encourage people to find somebody like that you can talk to, so that you can even just feel heard. It's amazing what you can realize about yourself just by sharing it with someone who's not part of the play-by-play of every moment of life. And the other one that I really wanted to just jump in and share with you is how powerful it was when I Googled how to stop drinking alcohol and found a guy. It makes me emotional. Found a guy named Kevin O'Hara, who's in Spain, an Irish guy who had moved to Spain, who struggled his life was being destroyed with alcohol. And he started making these weekly videos that he would post on YouTube. So he'd taken himself at his most vulnerable time and decided to make videos of it. Now, all these years later, he's built a whole business of it. He's had tens of thousands of people all around the world. He's been on this podcast twice. So he and I have now kind of become, we've never met. I'm in Canada, he's in Spain. But if I had not had that dark night of the soul and that reckoning with, I have got to, even if it's Google, I'm asking for help. That turned a light on for me. And so my hero is not Tony Robbins because I'm a speaker, or some professional athlete or whoever. It's some guy that you've probably never heard of that meant everything to me at a moment when I needed a life raft. But to turn it back over to you, and I mean, to just share that, and I hope that people will hear from both of us that what it can mean when you just give something over to the universe. We've mentioned a few times, to ask for help. It's amazing what will come up. And I've given a couple of examples of the light that was shown to me. When did that start? When did you start seeing some flickers of goodness that started pulling you forward at the point in the story that you left off?
So pardon me, I'm just actually flipping through my book here to see if I can find. So can I just read you a little excerpt from my book?
Please do. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is from the last night the restaurant was open. And like I spoke of that moment earlier where one day I had all this stuff and the next day I woke up and I had nothing. This is that in-between moment. So this is me just before bed on that final night of the restaurant being open. Where should I start here? Sitting in my car that night, I felt like an overstuffed ravioli that was stayed up for a while with my sister and confessed my fear of what was to come. As I started worrying and wondering about who would get our dogs, our friends, our money, and our stuff, there was something else lingering in my heart. It was a feeling I barely recognized. It was soft and quiet, just a glimmer, like a dot of cream in a giant pot. It clawed at me as I finally closed my eyes and tried to sleep. I thought it was maybe a sense of relief, that chapter of my life was finally over. As my eyes got heavy and my sister's breath slowed as she fell asleep, I realized what that feeling was. It took me by such a surprise. If I'd had an ounce of energy left, it would have brought me to my knees. It was hope. Sometimes a moment can look and feel like salt on our fingertips, but when we look closer and bring it to our lips, we find out that it is actually sugar. So that, I mean, to answer your question, I found that light the moment I crossed the threshold of that restaurant one for the last time. And of course, that wasn't the last time. I mean, I had a massive mess to clean up after that, financially and just from a business standpoint. But that day, the day that I decided to close the restaurant and end that relationship, to this date, I hope that is the hardest thing that I ever have to do in this life. And to date, it is definitely the saddest, most awful moment I've ever made it through. It is also like, it's taken me almost 3 years. It's been a little over 3 years since that happened. It's taken me writing a whole book about it and a lot of time. But I actually see that moment as like rather like triumphant now, because it is the moment that I took my life back. It's the moment that I said, listen, my life is not yours. And if I keep giving it to you, it's going to be over. And I choose myself. And when I started writing the book, it was really important for me to get that, what I just said, to get that part right. Because anyone out there who is suffering because of the choices they've made that look like a good life, anyone out there who's suffering in that way is going to come up to door A and door B at some point. And it might not be, those might not be their options. It might not be life or death, but it's going to be like relief or suffering, right? And for me, that moment was so pivotal in my life because like I heard a voice. I am a spiritual person. I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I heard a voice that was like, girl, you gotta go. Like, you gotta GTFO out of here, like now. And I listened and I listened and I said, whatever the consequences are of this moment, I am choosing myself. And I speak a lot about like women specifically in abusive relationships, because if you're in a relationship that you have to get out of suddenly, you're going to have that moment. And I write about that moment. If I don't write another word for the rest of my life, I know that I wrote about that moment in a concise way, in a way that women can understand, that might help someone leave a situation that is going to kill them or going to continue their suffering, right? I know it sounds a little dramatic, but
no, it doesn't at all. I was just going to say, if you'll pardon me for interrupting you yet again. You never know who comes across a conversation like this or
you
reads a
never
book
know.
like yours or
You never know.
hears the story at an event like Mo Mondays or wherever you happen to be.
Yeah.
And that person needs to hear that thing at that time. And what the positive ripple effect of that can be for them and the people around them.
Absolutely.
And when you think of it that way, it throws the pain and the suffering and the difficulty from those situations that you described into an entirely different context, I think.
Yeah.
When you're decided,
Mm-hmm.
there is so much power and clarity in being decided, even if you know that you have an army of dragons coming at you.
Yeah.
If you're decided, you'll have more strength of marching toward that than you will of just trying to run from everything else. But it's a journey to get to that decision, isn't it?
It's a journey. And the thing is like, even in this moment that I described where I kind of realized like, oh, this feeling it's hope. For the first time in almost 2 years, I felt a little bit hopeful for my future. Now, that feeling didn't last. I woke up the next day and was like, oh my God, what have I done? And was like a hot mess for months.
Yep.
And I went through the ringer after that. I went through the ringer. I had to deal with a lot, like a lot. It was a really tough couple months after that. I had no job for the first time in my adult life. I had no job. I'd closed my catering company. I had nothing to go back to. My sister was sick, and my family life felt very chaotic. I was grieving, the loss of my 8-year, relationship. It was a really tough go. And like I said, I went through that for a couple months and then decided to take off to Europe because I was like, I've had enough of this healing stuff. I'm gonna go see Europe for a bit.
Did you go by yourself?
I did, yeah.
So awesome. Perfect.
And it's part of my journey, and everything that's happened to me everything good and bad that's happened to me in the last 3 years and 2 months now, has been a direct gift because of that moment that I chose to leave and chose to live. Everything that's happened. So waking up today and seeing how sunny it was outside and saying, oh, it's my day off. All I have tonight is this conversation with Captain that I'm looking forward to, but I'm going to go for a 4-hour hike. And it's like, I almost didn't have, I literally almost wasn't here for this. So close. So everything that happens now is just a bonus. Like my whole life is a bonus now. And that feels undescribable, and I've had suicide stuff touch my life in a couple different ways. I lost a friend in last December. My one of my close friends' brothers last fall. Like it's touched my life in a couple different ways, and I never thought I would be a person who was going to share anything about my life, let alone my life story, let alone my history of mental health and addictions. And sometimes I wish I could just crawl under a rock and have no one know me and say, I just published a children's book instead about, asparagus farms or something. But this is what I chose to do, right? This is what I chose to do. And I don't know. I think I've gotten messages from a couple of folks who have read my book that it's been a light in their life. And yeah, I don't have to sell any more copies. I don't have to do any more interviews. Like the book has already served its purpose in a lot of ways.
That's so great. Saltandsourbook.com, by the way.
Yeah. Here, I'll hold up a copy so everyone can see it.
Yeah, I was going to ask because I know you went and got let me put your full screens for those that are watching the video so that you can see Salt and Sour, My Recipe for Starting Over by Yoda Olinyk. Saltandsourbook.com is the best place to get that. Before we wrap up, I wonder if you could give me kind of a quick summary of where you are now with, if I send someone to letyodacookforyou.com.
Yes. So
how are things going?
I would love to wrap up the story with my happy ending. It's not the typical happy ending I thought I was going to have, but it's pretty friggin' great.
Well, and these donuts too. I wonder if they involve these donuts because they get a lot of love on the Instagram machine. I've noticed that.
So in sometime in 2018, a couple months after the restaurant closed and I found my feet again, I decided to relaunch Yoda's Kitchen 2.0, new and improved, because I now am not stuck in the busyness trap. And I'm really like, it's like my business is working for me. I'm not working for my business kind of thing situation I'm in now. So I'm in a tiny little niche. I'm in the niche of healthy vegans who want comfort food. And that's who I cook for. And I've got a great following and lots of support. I say no all the time now. I have no problem saying no. I love saying no because when I say yes, you better believe you're going to get all of my attention and the best food and service you've ever had in your life. And that makes me really, really proud. And so I launched my catering company, Yoda's Kitchen 2.0. And I'm trying to right now, my biggest struggle in business right now is the same thing as it's always been. It's just that balancing life and work. I'm really lucky because I love my job. And I get to write for a living as well now. So I get to do I have not only one, but two jobs that I love. And it's just finding the time to do health, like stuff that makes me feel happy and healthy, stay active, and just really stay healthy is the main thing, mentally and physically. So just trying to find time to do that. So launched my catering company again, had a great Christmas coming back and a great summer season. When COVID hit in March, I decided, I was working on my book a lot and my book was coming out soon. And I decided I'm going to launch a donut company. I'm going to make donuts. Like, I don't know why that was my thing. I just like had a donut craving one day and I posted it to Instagram and it went nuts. And I'm up to making about last Thursday, I made 851 donuts, I think. It's crazy, Kevin. It is like, I cannot believe every single week there's more people ordering these donuts. It's a machine. It's still a blur. The fact that I'm like a donut making like
what's your Instagram handle? Is it at Yoda's Kitchen?
Yeah, so I have two. So again, I like when people think of me, they think of food and words together. So food is at Yoda's Kitchen. That's my little catering company. And my writing, you can find at Yoda's Words. On my Yoda's Words account, I talk a lot about my book. I talk about mental health. I talk about sobriety. And I talk about all the things that we touch base on tonight, really.
How much time do you have in the sobriety?
Well, I quit drinking 8 months and a couple days ago. March 1st is my sober date. So thanks for asking that. I know that you are a big advocate for that in the community.
Well, it's not something that I advertise or that I
no, but you do touch on it a little bit.
But it's been, yeah, I mean, I'll mention it for anybody that wants to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about it. It was 5 years ago, last June. So I'm almost 5.5 years.
That's amazing. Congrats.
Thanks. I mean, for me, it took 10 years from the time where I knew I was going to have to do something about this to the time where I could actually change it. So whatever that is that somebody has in their life, I have a lot of time to hear the stories of people that want to get honest with themselves about what they want to do to live their best life, and the dragons that need to be slayed sometimes to do that.
I do struggle. Probably my biggest struggle with it now is just so much of my identity as a chef and as like an entertainer and as a great hostess and all these things that I love to be is really wrapped up in wine culture and cocktail culture. But I am so lucky because I have such a great circle of friends that I've really worked hard at, and they've all been really great. Like I had one of my closest friends over for dinner last week early, and I hadn't seen him since I quit drinking because of the pandemic. And I was really nervous to get together with him because I was like, oh man, he's like, it's gonna be so awkward because I'm not gonna be able to like offer him a drink, and I'm gonna be like, let's have like 7 pots of tea, and I don't know if I want to tell him yet. Like I feel like it's such a big, like, sobriety is such a big word for people. And anyways, he just arrived and I was like, you want a drink? And he's like, yeah, I'll have like a water. And I was like, oh God, he's already feeling awkward. And I got like all weird. And then partway through the night, he's just like, yeah, I don't drink either. And I was like, what? You don't? And he's like, no, I saw how it was like working wonders for you. So I'm doing like 90-day no beer thing or whatever. And I was like, first of all, I felt bad because I was like prejudging him. I was like being judgmental of my judgment for him. But I also felt like this is so much bigger in my head than it is in the actual realm of people who love me.
Yeah.
And it's only a part of my identity if I make it a part of my identity. And maybe now sobriety is part of my identity. Like maybe that's not so bad. I don't know. So,
Well, if you're happy,
yeah.
it's
It's been life changing. It's been 8 months and it's been very, very, very life changing for me. So,
well,
yeah.
good for you, Yoda. I'm thrilled that we made the time to have
Me
this
too.
conversation.
This was great.
I have a whole pile of questions that I'd like to ask you. So consider yourself with an open invitation anytime you want to
Oh,
come
I love
back.
that. I love that.
Well, even just a conversation I'd love to have about the differences between catering and restaurant. I'm sorry I mentioned it because
Yeah.
now you're going to want to answer that, but I want to
That's
see
okay.
if my
Well,
if my
we'll save it
assumption.
for next time.
Yeah. But I want to encourage anybody who comes across this conversation. And the neat thing about these podcasts is you may hear from somebody 5 or 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
You just never know. It's
Yeah.
funny, in the lockdown, I kind of ramped up the podcast production for a while. And then once we got into mid-July, I pulled back because I needed to get off the treadmill a little bit. And then after we put out last week's episode with Ramina Morris, which was the first back in a while, I was looking at the dashboard, and the audio downloads were up like 400% for August, September, and October. I thought, sheesh, maybe the secret is to not do any episodes. I'm like, what the hell's the matter with you people? So, but it just goes to show you never know when somebody's going to find something.
Yeah.
And when that will get put across their desk at a time when maybe they need it. And
it's true.
I know that anybody that finds this is going to find great value in what you've shared. Thank you for being who you are and for sharing yourself with me and everyone else. And here's to the next time that we can see each other. Hopefully we can do that without a mask before too long.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I've been on a bunch of podcasts now, and this was a real treat. You're a great interviewer, and it honestly has just felt like we're just sitting here having a tea and having a conversation. So I'll come back anytime that you'll have me.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to have a podcast. We can have conversations
We
just
should
as
do
pals
that.
too,
We should
right?
do this. I feel like we actually have a lot in common.
Yeah. I'll just meet you at Zenza, and we'll
perfect.
We'll go from there. Yoda, have a great rest of the evening, and thanks
Thank you
again
so
for
much,
this, and
Kevin.
congratulations on the book too.
Thank you.
That's Yoda Olinyk again. Her book is Salt and Sour: My Recipe for Starting Over, and you can find it at saltandsourbook.com. You can also find her at letyodacookforyou.com. Again, the two Instagram handles are at Yoda's Kitchen. If you want to see evidence of those donuts that she was talking about, have a look at that. And at Yoda's Words. And by all means, I would encourage you to reach out to her and connect. You'll be glad that you did. I want to say thank you to Ryan and his team at Mulligan Realty Group, the kind of realtor you deserve. They've been a great supporter of this podcast and of the Mo Mondays London Inspirational Event Series that Yoda and I alluded to a little bit earlier. Contact Ryan and his team at mulliganrealtygroup.com. Also, thanks to Brett Lucier and his team at Provincial Glass and Mirror. Terrific business serving Southwestern Ontario, and they've done extra work through the course of this pandemic with helping businesses retrofit their offices and their environments to keep everyone safe, on top of the work that they do as a glass and mirror company here in London, Ontario. You can learn more about them at provincialglass.com. And I also want to make sure to let you know about my online coaching and collaboration service. It's called My Real Success Pass. You can learn more about it at myrealsuccess.ca if you'd like support and encouragement and collaboration and the opportunity to have sort of a regular dialogue with me. I do coaching calls just about every week through Zoom, and we've got a social community called the Turtle Crew that goes with that gives you access to a global community of heart-centered entrepreneurs. If you would like to learn more about that, I encourage you to look at myrealsuccess.ca and see if you think that it's a fit for you. Also, a reminder that Journeys with the No Schedule Man is available free on just about all of the major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I've got to update the slide there that you're seeing if you watch the video. It's not Google Play Music anymore. It's Google Podcasts. Anyway, you can find us on the Google machine. Imagine that. And the videos on YouTube, as well as noschedulemanpodcast.com. I hope that you'll take a moment and follow and subscribe to the podcast. Maybe leave a rating or a review if you feel so inclined, because it helps us connect with more people that we're here trying to help. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation as much as Yoda and I have enjoyed having it. On behalf of Yoda Olinyk, my name is Kevin Bulmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man.